Do you want to become an amazing game developer no matter what it takes? And if you do, then you probably have a problem, because you shouldn't sell your kidney to learn game development, because you kind of need one of those. That said, there are plenty of things that you can be doing that could be keeping you from becoming a better game developer, and I want to talk about 10 ways that you can stunt your growth as a game developer. Not that you follow these, but instead that you don't follow them, because why would you want to follow 10 ways to stunt your growth as a game developer? You want to not follow those ways, because then you aren't stunted. So, let's talk about the first one. The first way to stunt your growth as a game developer is to stop when it doesn't work. What do I mean by that? I mean that if you are running into problems with your project, with your code, if you're like, hey, the character should be moving right and stopping at the wall and they're not, why isn't that happening? And you just stop, you give up on the project, you're not going to grow nearly as quickly. Now, there are certain cases where, hey, this is sort of 2 steps beyond me, and maybe it's good for me to start with something simpler. That's different. What I'm talking about is, hey, I can't figure this out, or this code isn't compiling or whatever. I guess I'm just going to stop. Here's the thing, is that that's always going to happen. You're always going to run into that. You're going to run into that if you take a job as a game developer. You're not going to just have those magically disappear because everyone around you is super experienced. You're going to run into issues where all sorts of weird things are happening. I mean, there's stories like for DK64, they ran into a programming bug that they couldn't fix before launch. That's the reason why DK64 came out with the expansion pack included with every game, because the bug, they couldn't figure it out, and it would not go away unless they included the expansion pack. And so, listen, pros run into this stuff. It's not something that you're going to avoid because you're now in this magical field where all of this pixie dust exists because you're working with other developers. If you stop when it doesn't work, this is going to be a hindrance to you now, and you're not going to do well in the field. If you really want to do this full time, or you really want to work with other developers, don't stop when it doesn't work, or you're just setting yourself up for not having a future in game dev, frankly. Okay, here's another thing. So, assume that failure to reach your target is meaningless. Now, obviously, in the context of a professional job, I want to hit my targets. I want to make sure that I am reaching those things, that I am making something great and amazing that fulfills the needs. But also, let's say that you're working on a personal project. Thinking of this, so as far as professional scene, obviously there is still progress. Even if you don't hit your target, there's still progress. You're getting close enough that you can do some work with it. And but when it comes to personal projects, let's say that you are working on a project, or you're working on a game jam. A game jam is actually a great example. And you are working on a game project, and you are trying to make this all work, and you don't end up releasing anything in the end. You can't do it in time. And you could always look at that and say, well, there are things that I could have done where I could have, but let's just say that for whatever reason you didn't. So here's the thing. That doesn't mean that that time was meaningless. You learned a bunch of stuff. You learned new ideas. You learned new ways to do things. As long as you are learning and growing into someone who can do better next time, failure to reach your target isn't meaningless. Now, am I saying you should set impossible targets? No, that's not what I'm saying. But if you think that a target is reasonable, you go for it and you don't hit it, that's okay. That doesn't mean that you're a failure as a game developer. That doesn't mean that you can't pick yourself back up again and keep going. If you are, I think that a game jam, that just seems like an easy example, and probably one that a lot of people can relate to, is that if you fail to hit your target, pick yourself up, keep learning, keep growing. And also, let's say that you realize that, wow, I picked something 10 times too hard for me. Okay, next time, pick something just a little bit above and try to go for that instead. Or just try to learn a piece of it. There are different things that you can do, even if you decide, hey, I set a target that was unreasonable for me, you can learn from that. The classic example is that every new game developer wants to make an MMORPG. At least that's become true in recent years, I guess. Recent, I guess I mean 10 years maybe. I started before I'd never played an MMO, and I had Game Maker in front of me, and I knew I could make 2D games, and that excited me. Like, those were the games that I grew up playing, so I didn't have the same issues of scope that I saw a lot of other people having, because I just didn't have the same frame, I guess. It didn't have the same frame of reference. So, but yeah, it's really important to know that you are learning, that you are growing, and that time spent is not meaningless, as long as you're willing to keep learning and growing. Now, what is the third one? It is keeping yourself from easy projects. You might look at a project that seems easy and go, wow, this is this way too easy. This is below me. So let me give you an example. So for Cause Jam, I've been working on Dan and the Dandy Dandelions, and for me, it's really easy. And that's not to say that for somebody else it would be just as easy. In fact, 10 years ago when I originally came up with the concept, I struggled with it. Now I'm like, yeah, I can throw together this feature in a few hours and this feature in a few hours, and this is easy, and I already have in mind the architecture for it. It's really easy for me. It might not be for you, and that's okay. But the thing is that it's not bad. There are a few things that are actually really beneficial for working on easy projects. For one thing, it lets me see potentially new ways of doing old things. Perhaps there is something that I would have done normally, but now I can see a different way of doing it. Perhaps it's just practice. Perhaps it's just relaxing. And honestly, like in the last video, I talked about how it's kind of nice to have some relaxing projects that aren't all learning new things all the time. I like learning new things. I always want to be learning new things. I've been bored to tears not learning new things in some jobs. But the thing is that it is not bad to do easy projects. So if you are looking to keep yourself from easy projects or projects that are below you, there are a few different things to note. One of them is that depending on where you're at, it might be harder than you think. In fact, that's a common thing, is that unless you have done it before, it's probably harder than you think. If you have done it before, like for me, a lot of this stuff here, I've done this sort of thing before. I've done basic movement, I've done acceleration, deceleration, bouncing off of walls. All this is very easy for me. I can do it really quickly. I can do it when my brain is half dead. Like it's too late at night. I can do this stuff. But if you've never done it before, it might be really daunting, and it might sound like, oh, that's easy. I just need to increase the speed over time as I'm holding an input. And then you go, well, how do I read the right inputs? Oh, well, where do I put in that read? Oh, well, why is it jittering here? Well, why is it doing this? Why is it that it accelerates and decelerates at the same rate? There are all sorts of things that will come up as you're working on it, and that's okay. That's just part of the process. But don't keep yourself from easy projects. In fact, I'd say starting off, if you are early in game dev, work on projects that seem way too easy for you. Work on projects that seem simple, that almost make you laugh at how simple they are. For example, that could be, oh, you know what? I'm going to work on a very simple platform. Just to let you know, platforms are not simple. So already, you have no idea what you're in for. Even if you're using a package, one of the tricks with platformers is that nailing the feel is hard. Even if you technically have a game where you can jump from platform to platform and you stop at walls and you don't get stuck in ceilings and all these things, getting it to feel good, that's really the hard part. It's one thing to be able to code something and make it technically work. It's another thing to be able to code something for a game and to have it feel good. Very different. Anyway, so don't keep yourself from easy projects. There's a lot more to learn than you may think. And also, even if you're more experienced and more comfortable, that's a good way to sharpen yourself a little bit. Or maybe because it's easy, you have freedom to experiment with some things that you would have liked to do, but you don't have to do. And so I think that it's a really good way to keep yourself sharp and also keep enjoying your craft. And this one ties into that very much so. Number 4, see any work is below you. If you are looking at any task and you're saying, oh, well, I am a systems programmer, I'm not going to bother working on acceleration, deceleration, that's below me, then you've got a problem. There's a few facts. One of them is that regardless of the team that you're on, you are going to have to take on all sorts of different tasks. In game dev especially, there are so many bizarre random little tasks that you're going to have to take on. And if you see anything that's below you, then here's the thing. You're not being a team player. If you are looking at any project on your team and you're like, that's below me. Now, I want to clarify. If it's, hey, I need to work on this other thing that's more important, that's very different. I'm not saying don't prioritize. I'm saying don't see any work as below you. If you choose, or if you say, hey, I can't work on that right now, if it is because you are too important for that task, something is wrong. If it is because I have this other task that is more important, that's very different. That is understandable. But if you see any work as below you, if you're like, no, I'm too good for this task, or, oh man, making a game that is mobile and one input touch, man, that's below me. I'm never going to make a game like that. You know what? That's a great way to learn, because there are different requirements for mobile. There's a lot of complexity with getting a mobile game working right and making sure that the inputs are reading right. There are all sorts of weird things that can come up. Like, okay, so somebody touches on the screen, and let me just take out my phone here. So you touch on the screen, you move off the screen. Okay, did it register that you stopped touching when you moved off the screen? Or if you like, is it still registering a touch? They're just random things that can come up that you have to be careful with. It might be like, I'll use a package for that. Okay. Is your goal to learn and to develop yourself? If so, you are going to have to, at some point, be gone with some of those packages, especially if you're looking to learn as a game programmer. If your goal is to learn the fundamentals, which is really the most important thing, and I'm going to get into that a bit more later, then you have to be willing at some point to drop the packages. I'm not saying that packages are bad or that you're not allowed to use them. Just the fact that at work we're using Unity, argue, it's a package. And there's always going to be a level to where you're building off of other people's work, even if it's just, yeah, we're using their hardware. There's always a level to where you're building off of other people's work, and that's okay. Even if it's, hey, I'm using the diodes that somebody else made. I know nothing about hardware engineering, so I probably just said something stupid. Anyway, I'm going to move on from that. So yeah, don't see any work as below you. It's not, you're not above it. Just recently, in order to, the fastest way it seemed like to just get some data transferred from an old system to a new system, which is spend a little bit of time doing manual input. Now, I could have said, oh, manual input is below me. I'm a systems programmer. I can build a tool that will do this for me. But the fastest way was just to take the data and move it over to the new system. And so I did that. And that doesn't mean that I'm a bad programmer. Oh, no, I'm incapable. It was just, this is the fastest way to do it in this case. I could have made a tool to do it for me that I would have only ever needed once, and I would have probably spent more time debugging that tool that I only needed once than I would have actually just transferring the data. So yeah, no work is below you. Your job is to solve a problem, not to be above work. So don't see any work is below you. I could say that a lot. Here's the fifth one. Another way to stunt your growth as a game developer is to never finish a project. So if you are finishing projects, there's a lot that you learn in the finishing process. One thing that's really important to note is that even if you have a very small project and you finish it, then there is a real value in that, because the ability to start and to continue a project is very different from finishing a project. In fact, it's interesting. At Ubisoft, they have this thing where they have, from my understanding, they have teams that are devoted to finishing projects. And so when a project is nearing completion, they bring in the finishing team, because they know there are people who are really good at starting projects and there are people who are really good at finishing projects. You have people who are really good at building a foundation that others can build on, and people who will just go in there, they'll maybe make things a little bit messy, but they will finish the thing. And so being able to be someone who can finish projects, that is great. And even if you don't feel like you're capable of finishing projects, you are, but maybe you need to reduce your scope. Maybe you need to be willing to finish with a little bit less. I started finishing projects when I was 9 years old, and that was really good for me. I look back on some of those projects and I'm like, that's hilarious. Because some of it, I'm like, wow, the graphics are, they're something else, and the gameplay is something else, and wow. But also that's all learning. And even if you're in your 30s and you make a game that you're like, wow, I feel like that's kind of rough, or you step back and you're like, oh no, it's important for learning. It's okay to finish a project and not be 100% happy with it. I think some people would hate hearing that or would argue with that, but I'm talking not if in a professional setting you're trying to sell something that sucks, then you're going to run into issues. But if inside of your learning scenario, you are like, no, I'm not willing to count this project as done unless it is perfect. It's never perfect. Creative projects are a time sink, and you can go on a creative project for literally ever and always make it better. That's one of the things that I love about creative projects, and one of the greatest curses of creative projects is that they literally can be perpetual. They can go on for eternity if you let them. And so you have to be willing to say, this is done. And one question that you can ask yourself if this helps you out is, what does done look like? This is actually a question that Brene Brown talks about in her book, one of her books. I forget which book it was, something about leadership. And it was in the context mainly of talking to leadership and being like, hey, you want this task, what does done look like? And I think it's a great question. It's a great question to ask yourself as well when you're working on projects, because you gotta lead yourself on projects. I mean, who else is leading you? Your mom? I mean, maybe. That'd be interesting. Anyway, you got to know what done looks like. And that might mean that done is that I can move around on the screen. It does not necessarily mean that every movement has high fidelity animations. It done might mean, hey, you can tell what different pieces are. It might not mean all the art is amazing. You need to determine what done looks like. And that's going to change depending on your team size, depending on if you have different skills in different areas. You might say, done is very different for me as an artist than it is for this other person who is primarily a programmer. That's okay. Know what done looks like for you. And so here's number 6, and this is going to be counter, because you got it, the counterpoint. Finish every project. If you're looking at every single project that you do and you're saying, I got to finish every single project, this project isn't fun as a player, it's not fun as a developer, and I'm learning absolutely nothing, and you feel compelled to finish it because you should finish everything, that's not great. Now, if you have no finished projects under your belt, I would recommend finishing the project, even if it sucks. And there's always hard parts of projects. No project is fun 100% of the way through. That's just a reality. No project is fun 100% of the way through. It's just not. So if you stop projects because they stop being fun, that's not a good reason to stop a project. Here are some good reasons to stop projects. 1, the goal that you are trying to accomplish with the project is not going to be accomplished by the project, and you can't shift the project to accomplish that goal. For example, if the goal is, hey, I want to learn how to work with addressables in Unity, and you realize that the layout of your project does not lend itself well to addressables. Okay, well, you have a few options. One of them is that you can shift the project so that it does. Another thing is you can stop the project. And if the project is not helping you accomplish your goal for the project, then cancel the project. Just do it. If another example, you're like, hey, this project is supposed to give people an enjoyable mobile experience where they can just play for about 5 minutes, and then you look at the game and it is not a game that can be played in 5 minutes. You have to spend at least an hour for every session. Or maybe it's that the sessions are way too quick and it's like 30 seconds per session or a minute per session. And there's no reason, I think that there would be reasonable ways to make that fit within the 5-minute session in general, but let's say that there's not. Your project is not accomplishing the purpose, you need to cut it and start on a new project, or again, if you can, rework the existing project. But finishing every project, I think that one of the big things to keep in mind is, what is your actual goal? Every project should have a goal. And I probably shouldn't use the word should, because that can be a really big pressure and shame thing for some people. I know that I can use it that way towards myself. So what I'll say is that every project will be more clear for you with a goal. And so the thing is that if you have a goal for a project, then you can say, this is helping me accomplish my goals, this is not helping me accomplish my goals. And you can see very clearly, hey, this is worth cutting because it's not moving me in that direction. And it just gives you that clarity way faster, and you can avoid a lot of, frankly, wasted time, wasted effort. And so never finishing projects, that's a great way to stunt your growth. Finishing every project, that's also a great way to stunt your growth. So let's talk about another way to stunt your growth. That is a very different kind of area. Avoid the documentation. I remember when I was starting off in web code, I was very uncomfortable with the documentation. To be honest, and this is maybe going to make some programmers laugh, it took me like 2 years to get comfortable with web programming documentation. I just went to Stack Overflow every time, because every time that I looked at the actual documentation from end to end, I was like, this is kind of like, I just was struggling to parse it mentally. It felt overwhelming. I didn't understand the layout of it. I didn't understand the thought process behind it. And so it felt unhelpful in many cases. Now, documentation is the first place I go. Stack Overflow is the second. And if I need to, then I will just start seeing what functions exist on a thing, what methods exist on a class, and so on and so forth, because not everything is documented well and not everything has a Stack Overflow answer. But I would say that if you're starting off and you are completely avoiding the documentation, number one, it's okay to do that for a little bit, but it's going to stunt your growth if you just persistently avoid it. If you're like, I'm going to avoid the documentation, I don't want to deal with it. Now, there's different types of documentation. Like, for example, with Unity, there is documentation, and let me just pull this up. So if I end up going to Unity documentation, let's just pull this up here. Unity, let's look up Unity rigid body for an example. If I look up Unity rigid body and I go here, there's a scripting API. And so this is giving me all of these values. And for you, this might look overwhelming. Like, I don't care about this. I don't need to know this. I don't want to know this. This is too much. But then there's also the manual option. And this gives you much more of the, like, I'd say that the let's see, this is called, okay, manual. The manual side of it is a lot more targeted towards designers who are not as interested in some of those pieces. It's a lot more towards the UI aspect of it. Whereas what do they call the difference? Script reference? Switch to scripting. The scripting gives you a lot more of the code side documentation. If you are unwilling to dig into this, then it's going to stunt your growth. Now, again, it's going to be scary at first. I think that one of the biggest things to note when it comes to any of this is that when it comes to documentation, and this is good scary music for if you are scared of documentation, is that you don't care about 90% of it most of the time. Now, sometimes you care about every bit of it. You're going through everything. But let's say that I'm going through here and I'm like, I really just need to know something about movement. Control F, move position, move rotation. Oh, sweep test. Do I care about that? Okay, that's interesting. So it removes a game object. So you can do Control F and you can look through the documentation, see what you need, and over time you'll get better at parsing through the documentation. But if you're just trying to move a rigid body in Unity, you don't care about all these things. You don't care about angular drag or center of mass necessarily. Now, those things could affect your movement. I'm not saying that they don't matter at all for movement, but I'm saying that for your specific problem at a specific time, you may not care about it at all. And some of it is also that, hey, if you don't know what a term means, start Googling. So for example, if I'm looking through rigid body, I'm like, properties, what is a property? I could look up, so this is kind of a tip specific to Unity, but I could look up C# property and be like, what is this? Okay, you could look at W3 Schools, you could look at Learn.Microsoft. There are different places where you can go for that. What W3 Schools is usually kind of crapped on, which is okay. But let's say that you go here. I learned a lot of basic web programming. It got me started. It's not the documentation, but it does have a lot of tutorials, and so it's not the fullness, but it is a place to start. So anyway, I feel like I'm gonna get some crap for that, but that's okay. But you can start learning some things. You can start looking at these and be like, hey, what does this actually mean? And what do we do with this information? And so you can Google some of these terms: C#, public methods, C#, messages, C#, inherited member properties, C#, public methods, C#. Start Googling those things. What is a static method? C#. You can start Googling that to learn something. So make sure that you are willing to get into the documentation, and it's okay if it's confusing at first. I just remember it was so confusing to me at first when I was starting with getting into more code documentation, and now I'm like, yeah, I go there first. I know what I'm looking for, and I think that the biggest thing to note with documentation is really that you're not going to care about most of it. You are solving a specific problem. Most of this is unrelated to your problem. Once you learn how to hone in on what you actually care about, it'll become way easier, because in general, you don't care about all the things. Sometimes you do, and you're just then reading everything, and that can be a good way to learn about functionality that you didn't know about before. But if you're just in the midst of trying to solve a problem, then you can just focus on solving the problem. So the next thing that I would say after avoiding the documentation is, again, a counter to that, and that is limit yourself to the documentation. What the heck do I mean by that? So I'm not saying that, hey, you should just be going to Stack Overflow instead, although Stack Overflow can have helpful answers. Sometimes you run into things that make no sense. And so you're like, okay, I could look at the documentation, or I could go to Stack Overflow, I could look at YouTube videos. Like, for example, I was running into I'll just show this because I think it's going to baffle you like it baffled me. And I'm still trying to figure it out. If anybody knows how to solve this, actually, I would love for your input in the comments. It was not in this code base, but I was doing list, let's zoom in here. I was doing something like list int. Actually, you know what? No, it was even worse, because when I was changing my test, this was failing. Float value equals 3f. This was throwing a null reference exception, and the code was properly recompiling. I was able to step through it, and any changes that I made, like if I added a return up here, it would properly return. And I had no idea what to do about this. And to be honest, I'm still trying to figure it out. It's just, it was really annoying at work. I don't know why this would throw a null reference exception. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. But here's the thing. Documentation probably isn't going to explain this to me. But, and so that's one aspect of it, is sometimes you just run into things where it's like, hey, it's okay to like, go outside the documentation. But here's another thing, is that documentation isn't always complete. A great example that I've run into is Unity's Text Mesh Pro. And what I found is that looking at YouTube videos of people's recommendations on how to do something very basic with Text Mesh Pro. So, you know, when you have in a game like text that gradually shows up like, hello, how are you? And it just shows up one character at a time. The recommendations on YouTube are frankly atrocious. I probably shouldn't say that. I was actually upset looking at YouTube tutorials on it, because they're all horrendously performance inefficient, and they were more confusing, and they limited your potential in what you could actually do. So if you're wondering what is the way to actually show text letter by letter in Text Mesh Pro, I'll actually give you a quick on that. Oh, that's my coffee maker beeping because it's done. It was done a long time ago and I already drank all the coffee. But anyway, with Text Mesh Pro, you can actually select each character individually and then change the color of it. And so you do that, you can change the opacity so that it's 0, the alpha to 0, and then you can just change the alpha to 1 for letters one at a time. So people were doing things like changing the text inside of a box to keep switching it to a new string that had one more character. Anyway, you probably don't care about any of that or need to know any of that. The general tutorials I saw on that were disgusting, made me upset. Anyway, maybe just make a better tutorial rather than complain about this. People were solving problems. I can respect that, and it's better to solve a problem somehow in general than to not know how to solve the problem. So I'm glad that people are figuring out how to solve the problem. That is better. You need to be able to solve your problem, and it's just, I wish that the better ways were being taught. And I guess I could do something about that, so maybe I should just quit whining about that. Anyway, the thing with that, though, I'm talking about this whole Text Mesh Pro thing, and I'm like, why aren't people doing this? Actually, I have a very easy answer, because the documentation is poor. And so, what can you do if the documentation is poor? Well, let me, I shouldn't be doing this in Fixed Update, but I don't care. I'm just going to show you an example. Let's look at Text Mesh. I believe that if I look at, where is Text Mesh Pro? Is it Text Mesh Pro? Is it, I think it's TMP, actually. Yeah, TM Pro dot Text Mesh Pro. And so here's the thing, is that one of the things that I found is sometimes you just need to do this and there's no way around it, is that sometimes the documentation just doesn't give you what you want. And so what you have to do is just look at everything that is available in the code. Okay, I'm like, okay, let's just try. Now, a lot of these are inherited, but I can start looking through these. And what I found is that there were, let me see. So TMP text. If I start looking through this, I start to find some interesting things. Default graphic material. Okay, what is that? Okay, I can end up finding sprite asset requests. I can end up finding some different things. If I go, if I create a new one or I have an asset that I'm actually pointing to, I'm getting even more information. And a big thing really with this, I don't think that it's worth digging too much into this right now, but is just writing out your things and then typing dot and seeing what's there. And the reason why is, like, what I'm talking about is when the documentation doesn't give you what you need to go outside of the documentation. And that can just mean looking into things that aren't documented. And that can be scary for, like, if you're starting off, but it's essential. You need to be willing and able to do that. Beyond that, you might be working on a system that somebody else at the company built, but that has no documentation, or that is old and dead, and so there's no documentation on it, and you need to be willing to jump into it and just see what it does. And so if you're not willing to learn what something does without documentation, you're going to be severely limited as a programmer. And that might mean that you go into the code and you find out, wow, this is a masterpiece, and oh, it's just not clearly documented, or maybe some of the names are wrong, but it's really good under the hood. And so there are different things. If you have access, maybe you do some renames, maybe you don't, because maybe that breaks other projects, but there are different things that you could do in order to make that perhaps more usable, or just write up documentation so that other people can understand. So beyond that, it could also be that you look at it and you go, this is disastrous under the hood, and everyone else was just afraid to touch it. It doesn't even solve our problems. That's the thing that I think bothers me the most with the black box mentality, is that that's a rant, but people will talk about don't touch the code, but the code doesn't even solve the problem that it's supposed to solve. So you have to touch the code to actually solve your problem. And instead you're doing all these workarounds to wrongly solve your problem, or to not fully solve your problem, rather than actually being willing to get into the nitty gritty. You need to be willing to get into the nitty gritty. You need to. I will gladly take any day a junior programmer who destroys my code over someone who is afraid to even look at my code. Any day. So anyway, and maybe not any day. But I would rather have somebody who is willing to do that, I guess. Like, if somebody's afraid of my code, or my code is not infallible. I'm not infallible. I will happily take a junior programmer questioning what I did, so that I can have a conversation over somebody just blindly following it because, oh, I'm more experienced and I must know what I was doing. Maybe I didn't at the time, or I just wrote something bad. Anyway. So yeah, don't limit yourself to the documentation. Here is another thing. Oh, this is one I could get all not antsy about. Why am I saying antsy? I could get all up in this one. Limit yourself to tutorials. Okay, here's the thing. Tutorials are a great way to learn, and they're a great way to get started because they give you these clear boundaries and are like, do these things and you'll make a result like I made. Like, the way that tutorials generally work is that they promise you a result. Hey, if you follow me, I will get you to making this thing. And then you follow what they did, and ideally you come out with that thing. But here's the problem that I've seen people fall into with tutorials, and that is following the tutorials exactly. I would say that one of my best professors at college had this very great idea with each project. And what they would do is they would give us a task, but they would also say, put your own twist on it. Don't follow these numbers exactly. They would give us that freedom, and that was great for learning. And I know that I became better at the software that we were using because of it, because I was not afraid of breaking things or doing things wrong. Because tutorials, honestly, I'm trying to think of the best word for them. So many of them feel sterile. That's the best way I can think of putting it. They're just, like, honestly, when you take a tutorial in the context of itself, most tutorials are pretty lame. They don't create good games. They create something that it feels like a bunch of other games. Oh, I don't know, maybe because you followed a tutorial that other people are following too. And that's not bad on tutorials. That's not like bashing tutorials or, hey, tutorials are bad. But if you are limiting yourself to the tutorials or keeping yourself within the bounds of the tutorials, you're not learning really necessarily how things work. And good tutorials will explain to you what numbers do, why you would use them, why you would adjust them. But the problem is that a lot of tutorials, they don't, or even if they do, it's very different to have a tutorial tell you, do this, versus you doing it yourself and understanding the bounds of it. So for example, like here I've got this this game that I've been working on, and it's got basic acceleration and deceleration. You can bounce off the walls, and if we end up looking over here, we've got current speed, we've got acceleration speed, we've got deceleration speed, and I could ask some different questions like, hey, what happens if I change the current speed in the editor? Oh, it actually moves you around, and then it resets itself back to 0. So if I set this to like 90, then I can see that it starts to set itself. Oh, it looks like it limited itself. Oh, max speed. What happens if I change these values? And honestly, a lot of learning is just going outside of the bounds of your tutorials. Going outside the bounds of what you're taught or what you're told you're supposed to do. Because here's one of the things, is that if you do that, it's not like you're breaking the universe. It's not like everything is falling apart. Now, of course, there's a difference between doing this in a personal project and just changing numbers randomly inside of a corporate project. You would have to make sure that you are on your own branch, or making sure that you aren't accidentally overriding things that other people meant to do. It's still a great way to learn the system. One of my favorite things working with level designers is when they do things that I don't expect. I love that as a programmer, because I'm like, wow, you did something really, I didn't even think of that, but you did something amazing, and that is so cool. That makes me excited. That makes me smile. And you need to be willing to do that in order to grow yourself as a programmer. If you are limiting yourself to tutorials, or as a level, really, I honestly consider this to just be a creative field requirement. I don't ever want to, there might be context for this, but honestly, I would never want to bring someone onto a project who is so bound to the tutorials or bound to the rules that they aren't willing to try something different, because we're trying to create. We want to have maintainers. Those people are probably very good at maintaining, but for people trying to create new things, you need to be willing to also break things or to do ridiculous things. See what happens if you set the max speed to 10,000, or see what happens if you change the gravity on this rigid body, or whatever. Like, you need to be willing to try things, to learn things. Even if you make things that are ridiculous, where, oh wow, now they're just doing this on the screen all the time, you're learning. That's really important. And I'm worried that I can't stress that enough, and I'm trying to figure out if there's a way to stress it more. But I would say that I have seen people, the best people who I have seen at college, the best people, the people who were the best, they also made the dumbest things, and then they made the best things. The thing is that when you are first breaking outside the tutorials, you're gonna make stuff that looks really stupid. You just are. It's gonna look dumb, it's gonna look bad, it's gonna feel bad, it's gonna feel gross, it's not gonna work well, it's not gonna be fun, but you're gonna understand it better. And so when, the thing is, the tutorials are very much about making a specific thing. But you are never, outside of the scope of that tutorial, pretty much never, making that specific thing. You're making this thing over here, making this thing over here, making this thing down here. And knowing just how to make this thing, without understanding, oh, well, if I change the numbers, then I could make these things. That's why you want to not limit yourself to what the tutorial says, why you want to go outside, because now you understand how you could make other things. And so before you just knew how to do this, now you know how to do this as well. And maybe you understand how you could do this and this. And so when those other projects come along that, surprise, don't exactly fit the tutorial, you can work on those projects, and you're more knowledgeable and experienced for them. I don't think I have anything more to say on that, but that's something I'm very passionate about, because I think that that is absolutely critical. It makes me really sad and honestly kind of scared for people when I see them not willing to break outside of the tutorial. I'm just like, that's a person who is not going to reach their potential. They're not. Okay, number 10, stop. Here's another way to stunt your growth as a game developer. Stop doing work that you enjoy. Oh, you know what? Actually, I just thought of something else I need to talk about. Number 9. Number 9 gets me. Number 9 gets me a lot. Okay. You need to work on your own projects as well. If you're only doing tutorials and you're not working on your own projects, that's going to stunt you, because again, tutorial is its own project. Your own project, your own concept is different. Now, if you are not wanting to do game design yourself and you just want to do code games, you can collaborate with other people. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to on your own do something different, but you also need to be able to do other projects than tutorials for a few reasons. One of them is that, you know, if you are hiring people, I've heard stories about people being like, yeah, I looked at all their work and I recognize the tutorials from like 20 different applicants, from maybe 100, I don't know. Just a bunch of different applicants had the exact same thing because they followed this tutorial on how to make a grass texture. And it's not impressive. It's not. It's not impressive to see the same thing from 50 different people that you know is just a tutorial. And so if there's a twist on it or there's something new, then that's cool. But if it's just the same tutorial, that's not impressive to employers. That's not impressive to potential people hiring you, unless they maybe haven't seen the tutorial yet. But as soon as they have, it can be way less impressive. So you need to be able to do your own things. You need to be able to do your own projects and work on your own things, or collaborate with other people and help build their projects into reality and making them great. Okay. I think that's all I actually have to say on that now. Okay, number 10, another way to stunt your growth as a game developer, stop doing work that you enjoy. So one of the things that I found is that there are projects that I have a lot of fun with, and sometimes it's dependent on what I'm doing at work. Like I want to do something a little different than what I'm doing at work. At work, I'm doing a ton of things that are stretching me a ton right now, and on the one hand, that's great, and I wouldn't have, let's see, would I have it any other way? No, I wouldn't. I would much rather have way too many things stretching me at a time, because it has been a lot and a bit stressful, but I'd rather that than to have me not learning anything and be bored to tears. And you maybe you hear me say that phrase and you think it's actually metaphorical. No, I've literally done that. I've literally been bored to tears. It's awful. So some of it is work outside of work that you enjoy, or work outside of paid work that you enjoy. One of the things that I was doing last night that honestly was a huge release for me, and it's probably gonna sound crazy to anybody who is like, I don't know, it's probably just gonna sound crazy, but I was working in some C compiled to WebAssembly and just writing some basic C and some function pointers, and it was so fun. It was such basic stuff too. Like this wasn't the most complex stuff, but I think that I've got little characters that'll run around on here. I think I've got them running around here. Yeah, okay, so what just happened there? Well, I added a new type of intro where they can crash to the ground, but now I can make them run around. I can end up having the characters wander around on screen, and this was very basic for me to do, really. Like, it was just a few hours, but I really enjoyed it. I can do wander, I can do bounce. This is probably one of the funniest ones. I can make your character just bounce on the screen. And it's just fun. It's just enjoyable, it's relaxing for me, and it might sound crazy to other people that it's relaxing, because I'm like, yeah, I get to work in C with function pointers. Like, this is the best thing ever. This makes me so happy. And you might look at this code and be like, it's disgusting. Some of it's pretty bad. I'm still figuring out how to write clean C. I'm not an experienced C programmer, but I have a blast with it, and I'm enjoying learning more about it and getting more comfortable with it. So don't neglect fun projects. It might be that you're working on a project and you're like, this project is absolutely ridiculous. It's silly, it's goofy. I don't think that anybody would care about this but me. But stopping doing work that you enjoy, there's a few problems with it. One of them is that you can forget why you enjoy the thing. If you're so focused on projects that are just stretching you and aren't fun, like, you can forget why you enjoy it in the first place. And if you do that, then you're just gonna grow to resent your work. You're gonna grow to hate it, and you're gonna be like, why am I even doing this? That's not good. You need to remember why you love what you do. You need to remember why you first loved what you do. And so it's really important to remember why you enjoyed it, and so that's one reason to do work that you enjoy. Another reason that I think is actually even more important for this is, like, I know that there's another one. I'm trying to think through it and how I want to phrase it. It gives you joy in your other work. So the thing is that when you are working on something that is hard, because there's always hard things. There are projects at work that I love working on, and there are projects at work that are brutal and that I get tired of. That's just the nature of projects, is that there's always fun parts and there's always unfun parts. You're not getting away from that. And what I find is that when I have fun in other projects, it gives me a little bit more joy for the harder projects, or for the ones that are a bit harder or more tiresome or redundant, not redundant, but repetitive, different things. When you are doing fun projects, when you have something fun that you're doing, it gives you joy. It makes you more joyful for the other things, and it makes it easier, because rather than being like, I'm spending another full day working on this thing I hate, it's okay, I got a little bit recharged and now I'm willing to jump back in. Now, this might be a personal thing. I feel recharged when I'm doing work that I love. For other people, maybe it's just, I'm even more tired now, I can't do this. So perhaps this is more personal, but I find that for me, this is really helpful and definitely helps me to move forward more comfortably and more confidently. And so there you go. There are 10 different ways to stunt your growth as a game programmer. I'm gonna copy paste them all here Actually, I can't because there's too many of them. There's too many ways. There are just too many ways. Stop when it doesn't work. I guess I can read them out again, but honestly, you can watch the video again, and somebody's probably going to paste a comment saying, here are the 10 ways that you don't have to watch the video. I'd be like, but there's more in the video, I swear. I'm trying to make sure that there's more in the video. And so here's the thing. Obviously, there are way more ways to stunt your growth as a game developer. There are way more ways to go faster. But these are some things that I've seen that just I would consider to be foundational. Almost to me, I would consider them to be self-evident, which I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't say that because maybe they aren't self-evident. But these are things that I've seen work, and I guess I've seen enough that I just sort of take them as gospel. So yeah, all of these are really important. And if your goal is to make sure that you are growing as rapidly as you can, if your goal is to become the best game developer that you possibly can be, and these are things I would strongly encourage you to keep in mind. And I would also say, with all of that, have fun, enjoy yourself, don't take yourself too seriously. Take your work seriously, but not yourself is a common phrase, and that's one that we use at work, and I think that is really important. And at the same time, it's taking your work seriously, it's not taking yourself seriously, and also remembering that nobody dies if there's a problem with a game project. If Unity crashes, nobody's sitting over your shoulder being like, you made Unity crash? What? Wow. There go 5 points from your game dev cred. Nobody's scoring you on a game dev cred score. And if they are, then that's ridiculous. It also sounds hilarious. And I want to make a stupid game dev cred scoring system now. That would be really dumb and useless. Anyway, that's all I've got for you today. If you have any questions, then please drop a comment. Let me know if you have any questions, or if you want me to dive more into any of these 10 items, or heck, I know I could build out a list of 10 more without any issue. And my goal is I want to help you become a better developer so that you can create the experiences that you want to create, so that you can better the world. My goal as a developer, as a creative, is that I want to energize people for their real lives. I don't want to just get people stuck in the worlds that I help to create. I want people to come in here and then have a better life with their family, with their friends. I want people to return to the real world stronger. I'd love to help you do that too. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. If you like this video, please leave a like. If you want to subscribe, then subscribe. But it makes numbers go up, and that makes me happy. But it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that you're helped, and I want to know if I'm doing that. And feel free to dislike the video as well if it's not hitting what you're looking for. And tell me, like, what are you looking for? What are you hoping to get out of these videos? That helps me out a lot because I want to hit that target. So have a fantastic rest of your weekend, and take care.